All right, everybody, welcome back. I think this might be the day of the most sessions so far this year on our House Gov Ops and Military Affairs live stream. We are picking up our work on H649 and draft 2.2. Edited is posted. I want to really thank Damian and Tucker from Legislative Council for doing all of the work with us this afternoon. So, Damian, could you walk us through the changes on this draft?
I can. So one of the things that came to my attention after you went to the floor was that on page 6, line 20, so this is the prohibition on using commission staff or funds for the support groups after the commission stops. It should have been in support of the groups instead of in relation to the groups. So no longer using funds to support the groups. Does that make sense to the committee?
So now it reads groups established pursuant to, it should say to, it actually doesn't say to. Groups established pursuant to this subdivision may continue to exist after the date on which the commission ceases to exist, provided that after that date, commission staff shall no longer provide any assistance or services to the groups, and commission funds shall no longer be spent in support of the groups. I think that is a good clarification.
Yep. And this is going to be, when we vote, it'll be draft 2.3.
Unless we find a few more.
Yeah, let's know. Right now I'm editing on the fly, so we're gonna you'll have a votable draft at the end of this discussion. The next piece here, limited access commission meetings. The first change on top of page 9, lines 2 and 3, we've been talking about access by digital or physical means or electronic means or other means, and then we discussed about whether it was access or participation. And looking at the language, I realized that we're limiting both access and participation in different ways. So access, you can't physically access the space they're meeting in, although you can access the live stream. And then participation would be limited to certain people. So I just said to which access and participation is limited as provided instead of getting any more specific than that. So, and then it's as provided. And then there was a question about attendance in person or by electronic or other means. And that's on lines 8 and 9. So that's just been clarified to cover all of our bases, hopefully. And I think that brings us up to where we were. So we're out of yellow highlighting now because I had to take it off for the editors. And that brings us to the top of page 10, starting on line 4. This is a new subdivision 4, saying limited access meetings shall only be conducted electronically to the extent that electronic meetings are permitted for public bodies and in a manner that is consistent with applicable laws governing electronic meetings of public bodies. And I've run this language by Tucker, gotten a thumbs up. He's in the room if you'd like to talk to him. Although I think he's lurking in a dark corner there.
I think he would jump up and down and wave if the electronic meetings definition was not Tucker approved.
And so the reason for that language too is because after July 1st, electronic meetings authorizations may go away or may be otherwise changed. And so this just allows that to change without having to change this. Let's see, section 11, starting on line 11, is a new legislative intent section. It is the intent of the General Assembly that limited access meetings shall be utilized only when necessary to ensure the safety of the proceedings and to protect persons who may have experienced trauma who come before the commission, and conducted in a manner that's trauma-informed and best ensures the safety of all participants. Does that meet with your intent?
Representative Murwicki, does that capture what we talked about?
Succinctly.
Some of us were definitely casting ideas out in the air, and I think Tucker and Damien did a great job of synthesizing our. Does anybody have any?
Pithy and cogent.
All right, I'll take it. Let's see.
I don't know that we discussed formally on the record that the House Judiciary Committee looked at the language that is now section 12.
Yes, so section 12, the House Judiciary Committee looked at this language this morning. They did not raise any objections or suggest any changes to the language. They also did not give a thumbs up on the language while I was in the room.
Subsequently, the chair informed me that they got back together this afternoon. The member who had asked for a little more time did give their blessing, and the committee
Okay.
unanimously signed off on the language that is in this section. And I was also told very explicitly that did not mean that everybody that was in the committee supports the entirety of the bill. But on the section we asked them to look at, the support in a straw poll was unanimous on this section. So I think the House Judiciary Committee is confident that we've answered the questions about mandated reporter issues, and that they were comfortable with the new right to action.
Great. And we walked through that language earlier. I'm happy to go, at least I think we walked through that language already today.
Yeah, I think we've been through it. I just wanted to
Go back through it or have any questions? Okay.
not seen any hands. And committee, we didn't really talk about the appropriation that was here, except that we heard in testimony, this was kind of the original ask. It was not what was budgeted for this fiscal year, but it was what was in the plan for fiscal year 25, the next year of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And it's my intent to leave this in here. I imagine that our colleagues across the hall, if we pass this bill, will take care of that. So I didn't want you to think I had forgotten about the appropriation that's listed here, but I was going to leave that to the Appropriations Committee to figure out if that's the right number. Representative Morgan.
I like the majority of what's in here, and I'm struggling hard with this, to be honest, because I went back and reread what Rep. Hango referred to on earlier about what the VAB folks put out last night. And having been on, small boards i.e. selectmen in my town for a good number of years, the transparency piece is still gnawing at me. And I struggle with that. And I hear what they're saying. So I'm still riding the fence here, and it's just more of a statement. It's not a question to anybody. It's my internal struggle on it, and I just have a struggle with that. I like everything else for the most part within the bill. It's well intended. I think, like you said, the money. I'm glad you reclarified the money, Mr. Chair, but I struggle with that. So that's a Mike Morgan airing his wandering brain.
That's great. Yeah, I do want to open it up. So while we're, Damien, do you expect that we'll get the draft with that one word tweak? I just wanted to make sure if there was anything else.
Doesn't need to go to the editor.
Doesn't need to. Okay. So I just want to make sure before we get into the full committee discussion, if there are any other eagle eye edits.
Oh, sorry, did I get heady on this?
No, that's totally fine. We're there. We're there, Representative Morgan. I just want to make sure for the timing of things that we don't need to open up another draft in order to do any more business on this. So Representative Chase, go ahead. Thanks for your patience.
Rep. Morgan, just make sure I understand, you're talking about section 10 specifically? Is that?
Yeah, I think it would, I think if I recall, yes, that's where we do. I listened to what they said, and I reread last night's documents because I got those as well. And yeah, I believe it is there.
Representative Hango, go ahead.
Thank you. So I also have some concerns around the open meeting law, because I also serve on boards, and that just the fact that we're very specific that we are limiting participation. And I understand the intent. I understand why. But there again, this is a state-funded group and paid for by taxpayer money and should be transparent. So I'm struggling with that section too. I know we really have to, there has to be a way for a new commissioner to be appointed.
Mhm.
But I guess this bill may not be the way in my mind, because it contains other things.
Representative Chase.
I hear and I appreciate your concerns. I would just offer, we don't have folks going in and listening in on DMV meetings or ADS meetings or other things like that that are non-legislative. So I don't have any problems with this, and I support this section and the bill.
No, understood.
Representative Hango, go ahead.
Yeah, I think just for the purposes of debate, these meetings will eventually come to a conclusion. And the conclusion will be recommendations that are made to the legislature to spend money or expend other assets in terms of making up to the individuals or groups who have been wronged against. So full transparency, I think, is very important, because the outcome of this could be very significant. So I do understand the need for confidentiality in certain circumstances, but I can't get past this section.
Representative.
Is this, we're gonna take a vote after, vote tonight?
Yes, yeah.
Well, I'd like to go back to the beginning of the Truth and Reconciliation Bill. 3 years ago, I objected then on a broad number of issues. Number one was its excessive opportunity to look at such a variety of issues. Would like to think, and I know the commissioners have a real tough job. They've gotten established. You know, this is to keep things going now. I realize that, but I still have to fall back on my original objections to some degree. I think, and I haven't been able to get the real answer. I just went through the 11-page report that the commissioners put out. And I certainly can understand, you know, folks that were adversely affected by the eugenics movement, some of these other that I'm not even aware of, I'm sure. But then when they talk about research in here, that the General Legal Counsel and lead researchers visit the Vermont State Archives twice weekly to conduct research, commissioners join them periodically and debrief on the findings. This is essential to understand the history of laws and policies that had an impact on Accoon 28 communities. It doesn't even say adverse impact, it just says impact. And I guess in that regard, I'm concerned that, and I said this initially, this bill, the original bill to me, covers or could incorporate 90% of the people that I know, whether it's people that have adversely been affected by someone that has a mental disability in their family, whether they have a mental disability, physical disability, you name it. And again, I think by reading what I'm reading, we could be looking at, you know, whether groups had an adverse impact by attending Woodside. People could have an adverse impact by dealings with SRS. And then, again, I'd like to think that I contribute to, you know, a better outcome in the bill by talking about certain areas of it. But then I guess I'd finally like to say, I mean, this is all supposed to be looking at adverse groups or individuals are adversely affected by Vermont's laws and policies. That's what I remember in distinctly. And so as a member of LCAR, we just had 2 months of discussion around the new trapping and hunting of coyotes with hounds rules that the Fish and Wildlife Board promulgated, that LCAR, and a 5-to-1 vote, me voting no, didn't like the objections that LCAR put in there. And what they were, a couple of them, was that they don't believe that trapping is considered a form of hunting. That's one thing. And the other thing is the hunting provision in general regarding coyotes. And the reason I mention this is this. In our 2.5 hours of testimony, we had the indigenous tribal, Abenaki tribal leader from Windham County come and testify. And in his testimony, he stated that they believe in their culture that trapping is absolutely a form of hunting. Okay, they had certain ceremonies around beaver and all that sort of stuff. And that he reached out and said that he's not speaking just for the indigenous people of Vermont, but for all Vermont hunters and trappers. And again, I'm just saying that here's another example of us going down the road saying that we believe that trapping is well, there's the original bill was to ban it. And here we, as a committee, the LCAR committee, granted the board went forward with their rules and didn't approve of the objections from LCAR. But again, that's an adverse effect on a culture that we have recognized and said, hey, we're going to give you hunting and fishing rights. And they even mentioned that in their testimony. Here, the state of Vermont, you've given us hunting and fishing rights. That's much appreciated. But here you are going to start taking away some of these rights that we just got. These are words from an Abenaki tribal chief. So I'm just repeating that again. And I think we're continuing to go down that road of adversely affect, and I could go on and on with what I think would adversely affect Vermonters over the years. Doesn't necessarily have to be eugenics. That's a given if you ask me, things like that. But how aggressive and open-ended are they going to be able to do? When I read in here, it doesn't even say adversely affect. So I just think it's too much. It's too open-ended. It's going to be unbelievable in the end with, I think I mentioned it in committee too. If you have 5 Abenaki individuals who claim a certain adverse effect and you have another whole group that don't believe that that's necessarily the case, how is that report going to come back? How is that information going to be generated to say that all Abenakis in Vermont have been adversely affected? No, I mean, it shouldn't, because you haven't really heard from everybody. I mean, there's still going to be a silent group out there. And I also think, I mean, French Canadians were included in the original bill. I represent the northern part of the state, which is Raboins and Choquettes and you name it, Robillards. I know enough of them to realize too that I think, you know, for the most part, even though a lot of them maybe have been adversely affected, they aren't going to step up and say it. And maybe there's some that will, and that's fine. I understand that completely, but I still think there's going to be a segment that, and again, it all depends on how broad we're talking about. And anyway, I'm just not going to continue to support it for those reasons. But I appreciate the opportunity to say that.
Other folks want to weigh in before we move things along? So I really appreciate how everyone's been engaged. One of the difficult things about GovOps is that we touch on a lot of different topics. We sometimes are asked to move quickly because we're fixing a procedural issue. And I want to recognize that the bill that was brought to us not only took a look at fixing the issue of not being able to fill the vacancy for the third commissioner, but also some of the requests that the two commissioners and their staff had brought to us, and touched on questions about, what is with a commission that has these particular and unique powers, what facilities do they need that are different than other boards, select boards, commissions, councils, advisory boards that we have. And I really appreciate everybody thoughtfully looking at the future of open meeting law, which we're going to continue to work on, especially in the context of S55, which I believe will be over to us next month. And thinking through some of these challenging questions. I don't know if we're ever going to be able to satisfy all of the balance between folks wanting absolute transparency about every step of a process and the ability of folks who are doing work on behalf of the state of Vermont with folks who may have experienced really significant trauma, harm, to get them into a place where they feel comfortable sharing their stories and having that be a part of the narrative that leads to those recommendations. I think we've arrived at a pretty good place. We won't be the last stop here. This is the first pass on this piece of legislation. It'll go to appropriations, and our colleagues in the Senate will have a chance to weigh in as well. These are really difficult questions around this limited access question, deliberations. And so I appreciate the thoughtful approach while we've tried to work quickly and advance this vacancy issue and resolving that. So I think the committee's done really good work to get to this draft. And I think the concerns are well taken. And I appreciate everybody's hard work on this. I think I'm appreciating the work that our colleagues in House General did last biennium and in the bill that was passed, and the thoughtful and open approach that the commissioners who were appointed and their staff are taking to doing their best to have this process have the right level of openness and do good work. And the thing that really reassures me is that regardless of what recommendations they come up with and which items they choose to include in their reports along the way, it's going to be up to whoever sits in these seats to weigh into, is it serious enough that there needs to be some kind of action by the state of Vermont, funding new programs, and that those decisions are going to be left up to the elected representatives who sit in these seats down the road. So that gives me a lot of faith. And the other thing that reassures me is those representatives and senators that have to act on whatever these recommendations are, if the commission wants them to be taken seriously, they're going to have to back up the recommendations with a really robust set of data and evidence, and that the recommendations are only going to be as good as the transparency and the openness that they provide in their final reports. And I think we've done some good work here. Probably not done. And yeah, Representative Hooper, go ahead.
Well, I think Representative Higley raised a good point. We could have put a little more fence around where we thought it should go. It's pretty broad. I personally think the Sunshine Law, the open meeting law, is sacred ground. And I'm remembering something I heard on the news the other day, that every time somebody that has been, we'll say, wronged has to relive the story, it brings it. Yeah, it's another heartbreak, another pain. So not having to relive the story in front of the same people that come here in the orange vest is, I think, generous and warranted. So overall, I agree. We've reached a good point.
Anybody else want to weigh in? So I would entertain a motion that we find H649 draft 2.3 favorable, which will substantially include all of the language that we just covered in 2.2 with the addition of the word "to" in the area that I had identified. Damian, any other edits that we expect in a draft 2.3?
That's the only change we made. So, and I took off the highlighting and the watermark.
Is there someone who would like to make that motion? Representative Hooper. It's moved, draft 2.3. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the clerk shall commence to call the roll.
Representative Byron,
Yes.
Representative Boyden, yes. Representative Mango,
No,
Representative Morgan,
Still struggling. I'm gonna have to say no.
Representative Hooper or Burlington.
Yeah.
Representative Markey,
Yes.
Representative Chase,
Yes.
Representative Waters Evans,
Yes.
Representative Hooper Randolph,
Yes.
Representative Nugent,
Yes.
Representative Higley,
No,
Representative McCarthy,
Yes. I'll be reporting this bill.
9-3-0.
Just because I'm not sure how clearly that came through, Rep. Cooper from Randolph did vote yes.
yeah, I was just looking. I didn't hear him.
Just based on the math, I believe our clerk dutifully caught that as well. Well, but
I'm sure the clerk heard it. I'm just saying for YouTube land.
Great, thank you. Great, and thank you, Representative Hooper, for using one of your remote votes to help us make this committee vote. Great, so thank you everyone for the hard work today. We will be back at it after the floor tomorrow. And if folks wanted to have a quick planning huddle after we adjourn, there were a couple of folks that had volunteered to maybe talk about the government accountability language and fleshing out some of that. I at least want to get a plan on the table for how we're going to add some language to 702 and give something for the committee to really chew on there. So thank you all.